Located on the shores of Lake Erie in Cleveland, Ohio, is the Crawford Auto-Aviation Museum, with 2 floors of cars from all eras. We're going to get a tour from 2 of the curators at the museum and see a lot of what they have to offer, but still there's a lot more that we weren't able to show you in this segment.
Hi, I'm Alan Unrein, manager of the Crawford Auto-Aviation Collection, and I'm standing next to a 1914 Peerless. This particular car has an 825 cubic inch engine, and this was restored in-house in the 1970s at the Crawford. With volunteer support, we are now restoring automobiles again, and we're working on many projects. We have approximately 190 automobiles in the collection, and we have probably the best collection of early brass automobiles in this country. 2 of the cars we're working on right now is a 1924 Model T that personally belonged to Fred Crawford, and this particular car has not run since the 1960s. We're getting very close to firing it up shortly. The car next to it is one of the greatest designs of automobiles ever built. This is a 1937 Cord. It had a supercharged engine and front-wheel drive. This was gifted to us by the family of the original owner, who died recently. He bought the car new, and typical of Cords of the period, the engine block was cracked. We took that out for weld. When we complete this, all other mechanical aspects have been repaired. This will probably be the finest original Cord in existence. This is the 1930 Indianapolis racer called the Bellinger Special. What's very unique about this, it has probably the greatest of Indianapolis history. It raced in 13 Indianapolis races, and at its retirement it was then used in a Clark Gable and Barbara Stanwyck movie, To Please a Lady. Right next to it is a Lotus 11. This particular car is only 67 cubic inches, but was very light and was capable of speeds upwards of 130 miles an hour. This is a 1924 Red Bug. These were actually licensed, and you can drive them on the street, but most were used by children or on estates. This is a 1969 Mclaren, the winningest Formula 5000 car ever built. Right next to it is a 1982 March. Bobby Rahal won the Cleveland 500 with this car in his rookie year. Right next to it is something quite unusual. It's a 1972 Dodge Colt, but it's a pro street. So it's re-engineered as a hot rod and has an engine possibly 1,000 horsepower. It does 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds, and the rear tires are 19 inches wide. This is a 1904 White Steamer Model D. It was one of 719 produced. It was restored in the 70s at the Crawford Auto-Aviation Museum. Cleveland was the hub of automobile excellence and engineering prior to 1932, and over 80 brands of automobiles were made in the Cleveland area. This is the Ford EchoStar electric van. It's a prototype. It was developed by Ford to have a totally electric automobile. This is a 1917 Stearns Knight, a very high quality car made in Cleveland. What's unique about it, it has a Knight engine in it. A Knight engine has no valves. This is how it works. Sleeves move up and down. There's an inner cylinder, and the ports line up. These were very quiet and reliable engines, but very expensive to produce. This is another rare Cleveland car. It's a 1903 Hoffman. Like many other manufacturers, they transitioned from the bicycle making business into automobiles. This is a 1912 Curtiss Model E. This is a very important part of aircraft history. It's the only intact one in existence. The gentleman that flew this was Al Engel, and he supervised the restoration of this plane in the 1970s. This is a 1948 Chrysler Town & Country. It's as close as you can get to a land yacht. There was quite a bit of wood in them. The doors are solid wood as the trunk. Very quality automobile, and it runs as good as it looks. Everybody associates James Bond with this particular car. This is a 1965 Aston Martin DB5. Last year we were gifted with this car. It has 23,000 original miles on it. It took 2,900 hours to build this car, and it's capable of speeds upward of 150 miles an hour. This is a 1949 Cadillac Fleetwood Model 75. It's one of 595 that were built, and perhaps the finest in existence. This has an overhead valve engine, and it was made from the body dies prior to World War II because some people still prefer the running boards and that look of that pre-war design. This is a 1940 Nash. It's typical of a family car from that period. It's a very reliable, rugged car, and it costs $985 new. The cars in this row represent cars from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and this was a time where there were very dramatic styles. This is our 1932 Peerless, which is the flagship of our collection. It's the last car produced in Cleveland, Ohio, and it's a prototype, the only one in existence that we got directly from the factory. It's made entirely out of aluminum, and the frame itself only weighs 150 pounds. It has a V16 engine. There's no other car like it. After that, they went into the market of producing beer. This car has been sympathetically preserved, as most of the cars are in the collection. We went over this thing thoroughly and brought it back to original condition without a full restoration. We only repaired as necessary. 70% of the cars are currently now running, and we have made repairs and refurbished them by volunteers who generate over 200 man-hours of labor per week working on these automobiles. Typical of the cars worked on is a 1903 Cadillac that we're taking down to Amelia Island, and we're going to be on a tour with Cadillac to celebrate the centennial of Cadillac. It runs beautifully. Not only do the volunteers work on automobiles, we're very involved with community service. We go to many nursing homes and Alzheimer's patients' homes, and we are noted throughout the world in doing this type of community service. Also, if you'd care to volunteer, you can phone 216-721-5722, extension 315.
Hi, my name is Chris Dawson. I am one of the curators here at the Crawford Museum, and we'd like to show you some of our new acquisitions that have come in the last year or so. And what I'm standing in front of right now is a gorgeous 1959 Chevy Impala. And this actually came from one of our volunteers. A gentleman, his name is Kenny King. His father was actually a very famous restaurant chain owner here in Cleveland. And Mr. King is a car lover, and he became one of our volunteers and helped us work on our collection. And one day he just came in and asked if we'd like his Impala. As you can see, it's a gorgeous car. It's got factory air conditioning. Body's in beautiful condition, the engine's in beautiful condition, and it's just really one of the nicest cars we've gotten in a long time. Actually, next to it is a 1939 Lincoln Zephyr that also came to us this year. A local collector bought it and had it restored, kept entering it into various competitions, and every time he'd enter it, he'd find out what he needed to make it a 100-point car, and so he'd keep adding on to it and keep working on it until finally he did get it to be a 100-point show-winning car. And he had a whole wall full of national awards for this vehicle, and it is really one of the finest Lincoln Zephyrs out there. And so we're deeply honored to have it in our collection now. One thing we also do collect are just regular, everyday mom and pop cars. We like to have cars that our visitors can come in and say that they had, or maybe their parents had, or their neighbors had, and cars that they recognize. Good examples of that would be this 1964 Ford Galaxie. This was owned by a local insurance agent who drove it until he had 99,990 miles, and then he put it in his garage for 30 years. And then he gave it to us. And so it's still in all original condition. And next to it is also another Ford. This is a 1955 Ford Mainline, also locally owned. A gentleman had this. This was, he'd gotten it from his grandparents. Drove it to school every day, drove it to local drive-ins, took it to cruise-ins. When he got married, this is what he took his wife to the reception in.
And in fact, when he donated the car to us the night before, he kind of went out in the garage where the car was and sat with it for about 3 hours, all alone, kind of reminiscing. And in fact, even his wife was in tears when we came to pick it up. And he's been in here quite frequently, looking at it and bringing his friends in to see his car now in a museum. Another new addition we have to the collection, which is really one of the great story, is this 1959 Mercedes. This car was entered into an around the world in 80 days rally in the year 2000. One of the drivers was actually a local dentist from Hudson, Ohio, and the other driver was an automotive journalist. And they literally started in London and ended in London. And this car went through Europe, went through Asia, went through North America. They flew it over, drove it through North Africa, then back up through Europe to get to London again. And literally, the car broke down on the finish line and had to be pushed across. And we haven't touched the car since then. I mean, as you can see, it still has some of the original road dirt. It's got all the scars of the various accidents it was in all over the world. The repairs they made, everything is still intact. The interior, we have empty water bottles from North Africa in the back. There are goggles that they wore, dust all over the place. They even had a CD player from a boat they used because of the bumpy roads. But it's a real survivor and just an amazing story. And we have the diary of the drivers about everything that they went through. And it's just one of the neatest cars in the collection. And we're very tickled that the one driver donated it to us this year. And this is probably the one car in our collection we'll never ever work on. We're not going to do anything mechanical to it. We're not going to do anything to clean it up. I mean, we want to keep this as original as it was when it finished that race. As you can see, they removed the back seat and essentially built a platform that they could carry spare parts on. Spare parts are also bolted to the inside of the ceiling. They put high quality racing seats in because for 80 days driving this vehicle, they need to be as comfortable as possible. But it's really the changes that are making it so wonderful and really add to the story. And we're like I say, we're going to keep the interior as dusty and dirty as it is today. We're going to keep it that way for the future. A nice little set of cars that we have right here are a set of 3 stainless steel vehicles made by Ford Motor in conjunction with Allegheny Ludlam Stainless Steel. The first actually is this 1936 Ford, and this was built as a promotional tool. The stainless steel came from Allegheny Ludlam, and Ford produced the vehicles, and they were given to Allegheny Ludlam salesmen in places like Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago, New York, and they would drive these around all over the place, advertising their product by what they drove. The cars are very robust, except for the fact that the undercarriage is still made with regular carbon steel, so they had the problem of literally the floorboards would rot away, the engines had to be replaced frequently because they put hundreds of thousands of miles on these. But as you can see, the stainless steel body is still in a remarkably wonderful condition. We really don't have to do much to keep it clean. And actually, by the time of World War II, they kind of got away from this, and Allegheny Ludlam actually let the cars go. And that's actually when we got ours. The founder of our collection, Fred Crawford, worked for Thompson Products, which made a variety of valves and other auto components. And so he was a customer of Allegheny Ludlam, a big customer. And he was starting up his car collection and opening up a public museum, so he requested from Allegheny Ludlam that they give him one of their cars. And so the Detroit car was put on a boat, shipped to Cleveland, and the museum in the 1940s also even used it as a staff car because it still ran quite well. After the war in the 1950s, Allegheny Ludlam realized that they had a really great PR opportunity with these vehicles. So they actually tried to search them out. And they were only able to find about 4 of the original vehicles. Several had been scrapped during the war as part of a war bond drive. But they decided to try again, and in 1960, they created 2 Thunderbirds with stainless steel bodies. And then in 1966, again, they combined with Ford and created 1966 Lincoln Continentals. So the Crawford Museum is actually the only museum in the country that has a complete set of the 3. Go ahead. Okay, one of the interesting things about Cleveland history that a lot of people don't know is that for a time in the early part of the 20th century, Cleveland actually had more auto manufacturers than Detroit. Cleveland really was the automotive capital of the world up until the 19-teens, early 1920s. And that actually provides us with a very good collection of locally built cars. Some, like this Roush and Lang here, this is an electric car, and they were known for high quality electric cars. The company had actually built carriages beforehand in the late 1800s. We also had companies like Chandler, which are actually fairly sizable companies. There were over 80 different manufacturers, but a number of them would only produce 1 or 2 cars, maybe several cars. We've essentially collected the ones from the larger companies, White Motor, which later gained fame for producing trucks. Chandler, Cleveland, Roush and Lang, Baker Electric, one of the very first electric cars in the country. In fact, Thomas Edison's first car was a Baker Electric. We have some Stearns, which are really kind of unusual cars just for their engineering. Frank Stearns, the creator of the Stearns automobile, was largely self-taught and built his first car in the basement of his house. We also have, like I say, several Baker Electrics, which were quite popular among the well-to-do set because no fumes, no noise, no smoke. They were actually advertised for women to be their first cars. And we have several famous cars, like these 2 race cars here. These are the famous Bullet No. 1 and Bullet No. 2, built by Alexander Winton. These are some of the first race cars in American automotive history. Some of the first speed records were set by these cars on the sands of Daytona Beach and Ormond Beach. Henry Ford also raced against Alexander Winton, and a number of the very early auto manufacturers, Ransom Olds, would also be racing against Alexander Winton. So these are really 2 of the earliest surviving known race cars in America. We also have some examples of the very earliest of the Cleveland manufacturers. This is a White steamer from 1902. The company built sewing machines until the White sons decided to get involved in this newfangled invention of the automobile. And actually they built some of the finest steam-powered cars in America. Next to it we have a 1901 Packard. James Ward Packard actually got to start in Warren, Ohio. And he kind of got to start through Alexander Winton. He bought a Winton car, was unhappy with the quality of it, and Winton told him, well, if you can build a better car, go ahead and do it. So Packard went out and did it. The 1901 still runs. We've taken it out several times to various Packard meets. And next to it we have kind of its predecessor, an 1899 Winton. This car actually still runs, and back in 1997 we drove it from here to New York City, reenacting Alexander Winton's first historic run when he drove from Cleveland to New York City as part of a publicity campaign. And to make it extremely authentic, we had Mr. Winton's great-grandson, Charles Wake, who is virtually identical to his great-grandfather, drive the car, and he was accompanied by a plain dealer reporter, just as Alexander Winton was accompanied by a plain dealer reporter. And sad to say the car didn't make it entirely to New York City without mechanical problems, but for a century-old one-cylinder car that you have to stop and lubricate every hour, I think it did pretty well. And we also have some examples of not only the earliest of the Cleveland cars. This 1898 Winton is the first car sold in Cleveland, and it's actually in the collection of the Smithsonian Institution, which we are an affiliate of, and they have essentially given it to us on a permanent loan. Not only have we borrowed things from the Smithsonian, but we'll be one of the few affiliates actually loaning things to them because the quality of our car collection is such that they were requesting some for their exhibits. So we're looking forward to working with them in the future. Now we have some of our later cars. This is really one of the prettiest cars. This is a 1929 Jordan Speedboy. The Jordan Car Company is kind of unique because they're considered to be the fathers of modern automotive advertising. Jordan didn't so much tell you in their ads the technical details of their cars. What they would do is talk about a lifestyle. You know, you're young, you're aggressive, you like being in the outdoors, and a Jordan is the perfect car for you. So when today we have a lot of touchy-feely ads, it's because of Jordan. And their ads are considered legendary in advertising history because of that. So the Speedboy is just a wonderful car, beautiful colors. Jordan was known for their bright colors. A lot of people, when they look at some of these cars, they have this kind of belief that cars of this era are all dark. They shall be black. Not so. A lot of the early manufacturers used bright colors. Really, the whole black thing comes from Henry Ford, who found that the black enamel that he used for his Model Ts dried the fastest of any paint. So, you know, time is money to Henry Ford, so that's why he went with black. But other manufacturers like Chandler here in Cleveland, they liked going with bright colors. And the public liked it as well. And we have a few more cars that kind of interesting. We have 2 in a row. They're Rollins. Rollin was actually the brainchild of a gentleman by the name of Rollin White, who was part of the White motor family. Rollin White is the engineer who came up with the boiler for their steam-powered car. He kind of got away from the car business for a number of years, and then he decided to get back into it, so he created the Rowland Car Company. And these are examples of the only 2 years he was in production. He later essentially became known for the Cleveland Tractor Company, the Cle-Trac. That's what he was most famous for, which later was acquired by White Motor. So the family rejoined itself. And then one of the great little sports cars of the 1920s, this is a Templar, also built in Cleveland in the suburb of Lakewood. Kind of a unique thing that when you bought a Templar, what came with it as standard equipment was a Kodak camera, because you're going to be going all sorts of places in your gorgeous little Templar, so why not take some pictures when you're there? We also have a really nice collection of Fords, and starting with this beautiful 1907 Ford Model K, one of the few luxury cars Henry Ford ever built. The market was such that Ford's backers wanted a luxury car. Ford was opposed to it. They built this car. Nice car, not very well received, and Ford used that as his excuse to kind of get away from the luxury market. And instead, he shifted to Tin Lizzie, the Model T, which, as you can see, even in its early days, was relatively colorful. The Model T just became the icon for American automobile history, and we have any number of good examples. We have kind of a rare couplet. We have a very rare Canadian-built Model T, which doesn't look that much different than the American ones, but it's a really nice runner, and actually we take it out during the warm weather months. Our volunteers drive it around. We drive it for public events. We also have a nice example of a Model A station wagon, a Woody too. Presaging the days when the Woodies of the 50s became really hot. This literally was a station wagon in its day. This was how you would get picked up at a train station and your luggage would be brought to the hotel. We also have a really nice original example of a 1934 Ford. Just a beautiful car, and our volunteers spent a number of months last year getting it running again for the first time in years, and just runs like a dream, and we have a lot of fun with it, used it in a lot of public events. We also have a gorgeous Mercury Convertible. In fact, the day we brought this in, we rolled it off the elevator, and a woman came up behind me, an older woman, and she said that she had very fond memories of a back seat of a 1941 Mercury, and she and her boyfriend would neck. So it's the kind of response we like getting from our visitors. And we also have a nice example of the 1949 Ford, which last year we took to the Cleveland Auto Show because Ford was debuting their 49er concept. So we liked people to see where it came from, kind of the car that saved Ford in the late 40s, as well as a new exciting car that could really get some excitement going for Ford Motor today. We also have a number of European and American sports cars of the 1950s and 60s, very popular with our visitors. And just kind of a neat pairing here, we have a 1935 Chrysler Airflow and a 1935 Auburn. And you can see really with the Airflow the radical styling that kind of set it apart from other 1930s cars. The Airflow was considered really one of the true great streamlined cars of the 1930s. And its styling was so radical it actually scared off potential buyers. But this is just an absolutely wonderful car. It's all original. And today the styling is really not that radical. But in its day, especially when you compare it to the really flowing lines and kind of bulbous fenders you see in the Auburn, I mean, you really see where the two differences are. And the American public really wasn't ready yet for the kind of things that Chrysler was doing with the Airflow. They'd rather prefer the Auburn. But the Airflows are still, to this day, very rare but very wonderful cars, very unique, very representative of 1930s streamlined styling, and we're extremely fortunate to have such a good original example. Now actually over here we've got a nice automotive history story. This is the first car in our collection. This is a 1910 Duryea. The Duryea brothers are all usually credited with being really the first American automobile manufacturers. This particular car was on display at a kind of mini World's Fair here in Cleveland called the Great Lakes Expo in 1936. And at the end of the expo, this historic car display was going to get thrown away. And Fred Crawford, who was president of Thompson Products at the time, didn't like that idea, and so he offered to buy it. And this car became the nucleus for a collection which opened up as the Thompson Products Auto Album in the 1940s until 1963 when it was given to the Western Reserve Historical Society, and then it became the Crawford collection that it is today. So this is always going to be kind of the first jewel in our collection, and we'll always be highlighting it as such. And I guess the neat thing is by this time the two Duryea brothers were competing against one another, And so we also have an example of a 1910 Stevens Duryea made by the other brother. And you can see radically different styling for the same year. The one kept with a very traditional, almost like a horse-drawn carriage styling, the high wheeler, while the other went with more of a traditional standard automobile body. So, two brothers, same year, two different cars. And like I say, the first of many jewels in the collection. We collect all sorts of weird stuff at the Crawford. We have planes, we have buses, we have army vehicles, cars, carriages. We also have motorcycles. We have a small collection, but it's a nice collection. We've got everything from an Indian, we have a Cleveland motorcycle, a new era built in Dayton, Ohio. We also have some really nice European models, a Vincent Black Shadow and a Vincent Black Prince, which are two very highly desirable, very fast, very powerful motorcycles. So we're always kind of looking for more. We've been really trying to beef up our Harley-Davidson collection in the last few years. So we have some very old Harley-Davidsons, and now we're starting to acquire some newer ones. So it's part of the collection I think that's going to grow in the future, because the popularity of motorcycles really seems to be growing. And as a museum, we really do need to keep up with that. Our collection founder is Frederick Crawford, who was an industrialist in Cleveland. He was the president of Thompson Products, which later became TRW. Fred had a passion for automobiles and started collecting in the late 1930s with our 1910 Duryea, and in 1943 opened a museum called the Thompson Products Auto Album here in Cleveland. It was one of the first auto museums in the world open to the public. And until 1963 it was located near downtown Cleveland, and in 1963 he donated the entire collection to the Western Reserve Historical Society, at which point we renamed it the Frederick Crawford Collection. And that's the name it still has today, and we still honor Mr. Crawford's memory and the generosity of his collection. Now, we've showed you the past and the present of the Crawford Museum, but we'd like to show you as well the future. That's shown in this model here. This is the model for the Frederick Crawford Museum of Transportation and Industry, which we are planning right now, and we are hoping to have built and open in 2005 on Cleveland's lakefront, adjacent to Burke Lakefront Airport. It'll be a very large, 150,000 square foot building. We'll have a number of exhibits, not just showing off the cars, but also showing off the planes. We're going to have a train in the collection, streetcars. We have a 1930s diner, which will be restored and put in the museum. And we'll have a lot of very interactive, very immersive exhibits to teach people not only the history of cars, but really the society that cars are in, the importance of them. We'll have a mock-up of one of the Cleveland car factories, the White Motor Factory, where kids will be able to make scale models of cars and perhaps even get in one or two of them and ride them around the museum floor. So we really want this to be a very educational institution. We want children and visitors to the area to understand the history of the area, the importance of the automobile in everyday life, and to have fun, because history is and always should be fun.